Okay, now I want to talk about the circulatory and respiratory systems real quick. So with the circulatory system, we're talking about the system that moves blood around your body, and the heart of the circulatory system is the heart, and it consists of a series of chambers, 4 chambers in particular. The ones towards the top are the right and left atriums, and then the lower ones are the right and left ventricles. The blood vessels that run away from the heart are known as arteries, and the ones that come to the heart are veins. Within the heart, and also within some of the arteries and veins, we have some valves. And the valves, what do? Well, as the blood is moved or pumped in from the atriums into the ventricles, when the ventricles contract, the valves close, and it keeps the blood from flowing back into the atriums. That is, the valves keep the blood flowing in one direction around this system. So that's a very important function. We'll want to remember some of the names of these things. In addition to right and left atrium and right and left ventricle, the major veins that come back to the heart onto the right side are what are known as the anterior and posterior vena cava. The artery that leaves the heart from the right side is known as the pulmonary artery, and it breaks off into the left and right side, going to the left and right lung. The veins that come back from the lungs to the left side of the heart are known as the pulmonary veins. Anytime you see pulmonary, that's going to involve blood flow to and from the lungs. And then the major artery leaving the heart from the left side is known as the aorta. And there are several branches that go off to the upper portion of your body, and then a major one that goes down to the lower part of your body. Your heartbeat is controlled by what are known as these nodes, and there's a node in your right atrium known as the sinoatrial node, and it's what gets the heartbeat started, and that causes the atriums to contract. And then it's passed on to what's called the atrioventricular node, and that stimulates the ventricles to contract. So your heartbeat occurs sort of in 2 main steps. You have the contraction of the atria, which moves blood down to the ventricle. Then they relax, and the ventricles contract, which forces blood out of the arteries and sends it around the body. And then there's a moment where the ventricles are relaxing, and then the atria contract, and then the ventricles relax, atria, ventricles contract, relax, etc. So when your heart is forcing blood out of the heart and through the arteries, that creates pressure in the system. And when the ventricles are contracting, there's more pressure in the system, particularly in the arteries, and that's what's known as the systolic pressure. When you get your blood pressure taken, it's the larger number. And then when the ventricles are relaxing, the pressure decreases, and that's what's known as the diastolic pressure. That's the lesser number. So, for example, you might have 120 over 80 or something like that. Your arteries have to withstand a significant amount of pressure when those ventricles are contracting and forcing blood through them, and so they have a relatively thick muscular wall, whereas veins have a thinner muscular wall, because after the blood has flowed through the arteries to all the capillary beds and then back into the veins, there's a lot less pressure on it, and so they don't need to be as thick-walled. And also, some of the veins have valves to keep the blood flowing in one direction as well. Think about it. You have veins that run from your foot, basically, all the way back up your leg and towards the heart, and that's a long way to travel. And again, there's not a lot of pressure in those veins, so you have these valves that keep the blood from sort of pooling in your feet and keep it moving along on up the body. All right, so here's the whole circulation again. We have the vena cavas coming back to the heart on the right side, to the atrium, then to the ventricle, through the pulmonary arteries, to the lungs, where the blood is gaining oxygen, and also getting rid of CO2, so gas exchange, back to the heart through the pulmonary veins, to the left side, left atrium, left ventricle, out the aorta, and all over the body, to these capillary beds where oxygen is delivered and also nutrients. So you have two main circuits. You have what's called the pulmonary circuit going to and from the lungs, and then the systemic circuit, which goes out the aorta, all around the body, back to the heart through the vena cavas. Now we have a couple side systems here, what's known as the renal circulation, and that's a branch that comes off of systemic and goes to the kidneys to clean out the blood and then back. And you also have what's called the hepatic portal system, and this is a connection between your intestines and your liver. And so in your intestines, you're absorbing nutrients from that digested food into the circulatory system to the liver, and the liver is where you store excess foods, particularly excess sugars. And then after you've eaten, that food will be released from the liver slowly to provide energy to your body. So the liver stores it, so it's not all there at one time in your circulatory system. Okay, sometimes our blood vessels, in particular our arteries, can get clogged up. This is known as atherosclerosis. You get these fatty deposits in there, which can cause them to be more and more constricted. And sometimes they can become blocked, which is a problem. When those blockages occur in coronary arteries, which are arteries that supply the heart with blood, it can result in a heart attack. When the flow is reduced, it's what's known as angina, and you have pain in your heart. And again, when you get a complete blockage of one or more of those arteries, you have a heart attack. And the muscles are not getting enough oxygen and food, and they start seizing up. They don't work so well. Your blood is, of course, your circulatory system has a lot of blood flowing through it. And blood is very important. As you know, it has a liquid component known as the plasma and a cellular component. The plasma consists mostly of water. There's also some proteins in there and some other solutes, certain nutrients and the gases that are dissolved in it, certain waste products that will be removed by your kidneys primarily, regulatory substances, certain hormones. Okay, the cells come in three types. You have the red blood cells, otherwise known as erythrocytes, and you can see that's the bulk of the cells. You have leukocytes, otherwise known as white blood cells, and there's lots of different types. Don't worry about the different types, but they're all involved with the immune system and fighting off pathogens. And then the platelets, which as you probably know are involved with forming blood clots. The platelets in particular interact with this protein here called fibrinogen, which is what forms the scabs where you have a cut. All right, I'm sure you're aware of different blood types, and we talked about this back in the genetics section. And you can be A type, B type, AB, or O. You recall this is a system in which there's three alleles, the A allele, the B allele, and the O, and so you can be AA or AO, and you're A type. That's because A is dominant to O, you'll remember. BB or BO, and you're B type because B is dominant to O. You can be AB, and you remember those two alleles are co-dominant to each other, or you can be the double recessive. You can be OO or just have O type. Now, A's can only receive A or O blood. Basically, A's produce antibodies against B blood, and so they reject either B or AB. B's produce antibodies against A, and they reject A or AB blood. AB individuals produce neither type of antibody, so therefore they are the universal recipient. They can receive any type of blood. O's produce antibodies against A and B. So if they're given A, B, or AB, they reject it. They can only receive O. Notice that O is essentially the universal donor, whereas AB again is the universal recipient. Your lymphatic system, real quick, this is a system of vessels that takes fluid from your cells back to the heart. What happens as blood flows around your body, some of the liquid is lost from your circulatory system into the surrounding cells, and the lymphatic system is what takes it, collects that liquid and sends it back into the circulatory system up by your heart. You're probably familiar with the fact that you have these lymphatic nodes around your body, and this is where these vessels become enlarged, and they have a lot of white blood cells that hang out in these nodes. And when you have an infection, sometimes these nodes swell up because those white blood cells are proliferating as they're fighting off the infection. Okay, your respiratory system, basically your lungs for the most part, but also your nasal passageways in your mouth where air is coming in, down through the trachea to the bronchi, which are the main branches, and then to bronchioles, which are smaller branches, and those smaller branches end in what are called alveoli, which are, you can think of as the cul-de-sacs of the lungs. They're these sacs that you can see are surrounded by blood vessels, these thin capillaries. So what happens is the blood that is relatively low in oxygen, which is coming from the heart, gains oxygen, and then that oxygen-rich blood flows back to the heart through the pulmonary vein. And so you can see the heart is sort of wedged in between your right and left lung. You recall you have a muscle here called the diaphragm, which separates your thoracic from your abdominal cavity. And the diaphragm is what helps you breathe. When it moves down, that expands the lungs and draws air into your lungs, pulling it in basically. And when the diaphragm pushes up, it causes your lungs to contract and forces air out. Also, your ribs and the rib muscles are involved with expanding and contracting your lungs as well. Again, the alveoli are where gas exchange occurs. Your blood stream gains oxygen and gives up CO2. You're breathing in air that's relatively rich in oxygen and breathing out air that is enriched in CO2. Now, the air you breathe out is not completely CO2. It still has a fair amount of oxygen in it, which is what makes CPR possible. You can breathe into someone and they're still getting a fair amount of oxygen. Of course, there are lots of things that are bad for your lungs. Polluted air, in particular smoking, can really damage your lungs and compromise lung function, and in the worst case, cause lung cancer. So don't think of smoking. It's a bad habit and an expensive habit. You don't want to waste your money on something that's going to kill you. Okay, we'll talk about this a little bit in class. Bye-bye.